Marta Keller. The foreman took his pencil and crossed out her morning tally. Then he wrote a smaller number underneath it. The reason he gave was slow hands. She did not argue. She did not cry. She reached into her apron, took out a small brass hand lens, wiped a smear of tomato pulp off the glass, and kept sorting. That was the first time. It was not the last. A few weeks later, at the belt, in front of the whole sorting floor, 31 women, I counted them, Dell Prewitt tapped the backs of her hands like you'd tap a slow horse. And he said it loud enough for all of them. Slow hands cost this plant money. Mrs. Keller, read the tally, not me. The dock was public now. Everybody heard it. But here is the thing nobody on that floor noticed. As Prewitt walked off, Marta's eyes were not on her hands at all. They were on a bin of 90-degree culls, the soft ones, the trimmings rolling toward the catsup kettle. And then her eyes went to the calendar tacked by the door. She knew, to the week, when the man with the microscope was coming. So that night she did something she had not done in 15 years. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before we go on, do me one small favor. Subscribe so the next one finds you. And leave a comment telling me the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. It was the fall of 1934. Colvin's Landing, Ohio, a little river town in the lower valley. The kind of place where the whole year turned on one thing. The pack. The tomato pack at Rennick Brothers Canning Company. When the fields came in ripe, the plant ran day and night, and the town ate. When the pack failed, the town went hungry all winter. Everybody understood this. It was in the air like the smell of steam and lye. Marta Keller came to that plant the way most people came to things in those years. She needed the money. She was 44, a widow. Her husband Emile had come home from the war with his lungs half gone, scarred by gas in a French wood, and he had coughed his way through 15 more years before the winter of 1933 took him for good. She had a small room over the hardware store. She had a widow's grief, which is a quiet thing, and a widow's arithmetic, which is a loud one. The rent came due whether you grieved or not. So she took the work they'd give her. First the peeling shed, where the tomatoes came out of the scald and you slipped the skins with your thumbs until your thumbs cracked. Then the sorting belt, where the fruit rolled past and you pulled the bad ones. The green, the rotten, the split, and let the good ones ride on to the kettles. Piecework. You got paid by what you moved and what you saved. Slow hands meant thin pay. Everybody knew that too. The other women liked her well enough. She was steady. She didn't complain, and she didn't gossip. She kept her head down and her hands moving. And at the end of a shift she'd nod goodnight and walk back up the hill to the room over the hardware store, and nobody thought a single thing more about her. She was the new sorting line woman. That was all she was. That was all they saw. Now I want to tell you what they did not see. Because it matters. It is the whole story, really, 15 years before that belt. Marta Keller was not Marta Keller, she was Marta Reinhold. And she did not sort tomatoes, she ran a test bench, a real one. At the State Agricultural Experiment Station out at Verona, she was the woman they handed the samples to. Mold counts, acidity, Brix, that's the sugar, the sweetness, measured on a scale. If a load of fruit or a jar of preserves needed a number put on it, an honest number. A number a court or a buyer could trust, it came across her bench and she gave it that number. She was good. She was better than good. She trained the young men who came through green and nervous, taught them to run a slide, taught them to hold the count. And then, in the spring of 1919, she married Emile Keller. And the same week she signed that marriage license, the state let her go. Not for anything she did. There was a rule in those days. They called it the marriage bar. A married woman could not hold a state post. A married woman belonged at home, that was the thinking, and it was written down plain as day. So the state that had certified her, that had trusted her number over any man's on the floor, stopped seeing a chemist the moment she signed her name next to a husband's. One week she was the chief of a test bench. The next week she was nobody's chemist. She was a wife. But listen, this is the part I need you to hold on to. She never lost one single thing she knew. Not one. The number was still in her. The count was still in her hands. You can take away a woman's title and her wage and her bench. You cannot reach inside her skull and take out 15 years of knowing how a thing spoils and how you prove it. That stayed. It sat quiet in her all those years like a coal under ash. And that is why she kept the little brass hand lens in her apron. She'd tell you it was nothing. An old habit. If anyone had asked, and nobody ever did, she'd have said she just liked to look at things close. That's all. An old habit, nothing more. But out of that same old habit, she counted. She counted everything. Rows in a field as the truck went past. The filaments in a bad tomato when she split it with her thumb. The temperature of a bin, which she could feel through the wood with her palm and put a number to, near enough. She couldn't help it. Counting was how her mind held the world still. So on her first days at Rennick Brothers, while the other women saw a belt and a wage, Marta saw the whole works. She saw the scald tanks in the peeling shed. She saw the sorting belt. And past it the great kettles where the catsup cooked down thick and red and sweet. And she saw the cull bin. The 90-degree bin, they called it, for the sorting angle, where the soft ones and the trimmings and the borderline fruit went to be hauled off. She saw the kettle and she saw the bin. Once she noted them the way she noted everything, and she said nothing. And she went on pulling green tomatoes off a moving belt for less money than a man-made sweeping the floor. Nobody knew what they had. That's the shape of it. The plant had hired an analytical chemist and paid her a sorter's wage, and for season after season not one soul on that floor ever thought to ask her a single question about anything. Now, let me tell you about Dell Prewitt. Prewitt was the sorting floor foreman, 38 years old, a big man with a pencil behind his ear and a tally book in his fist, and he ran that floor like the whole world lived or died on tonnage. Because for him, it did. There was a bonus at the end of the season. A bonus tied to the weight the plant packed out, the more that went into the cans. The more went into Dell Prewitt's pocket come November. He believed in weight the way some men believe in Scripture. And he believed one other thing, deep in his bones. He believed that on his floor, the only thing worth measuring was hands. How fast they moved, how much they pulled. A woman was a pair of hands to Dell Prewitt, and a slow pair was money out of his pocket. He'd walk the line with that tally book and dock a woman a few cents for lagging, and he thought he was being a sharp manager when he did it. He never once thought about eyes. It never crossed his mind that anything on his floor might be doing anything but moving. That was his blind spot, and it was a wide one, and it was going to cost him everything. The first dock came on an ordinary Tuesday. Marta was at her place on the belt, working steady, the way she always did. Not fast, no, she'd never been fast in the way Prewitt wanted. But she was accurate. She never let a bad one ride. Where the young girls beside her would miss a split tomato in their hurry, one that would sour a whole batch downstream, Marta caught it every time. Her count was clean. In any honest accounting, that was worth more than speed. But Prewitt didn't count clean. He counted pounds. He came down the line with his book, and he stopped behind her, and he watched her hands for a moment. Then he clicked his tongue. He took the pencil from behind his ear. And he crossed out the tally she'd earned that morning and wrote a lower one under it. Slow hands, he said. Just that. A few cents gone, docked off a widow's day. She did not argue. She did not turn around. She reached into her apron, took out the little brass lens, wiped a fleck of pulp from the glass with her thumb, put it back, and kept sorting. That was offense number 1. It was private. Just her and him and the belt, and the sound of the machinery loud enough to swallow it. Nobody else even knew it had happened. She carried it home in her head that night, up the hill, into the room over the hardware store. And there she did the other kind of counting, the widow's arithmetic. She sat with a stub of pencil and figured what the dock had cost her against the rent and the coal and the bread, and the numbers came out tight. Tighter than they should have. A few cents is nothing to a man with a bonus coming. A few cents is supper to a woman alone. She knew that in her stomach. But she folded the paper and put out the lamp and said nothing, because saying something had never once, in 15 years, made a single thing better. That was her blind spot, if you want to call it one. 15 years of being unseen had taught her to expect nothing. To wait. To keep the coal under the ash. It had kept her steady all that time. It had also nearly taught her to stay quiet forever. The second dock came with a witness. Junie Farrow worked the place beside Marta on the belt. 19 years old, quick-handed and quick-tempered, with a mother homesick and a household that ran on Junie's piecework and not much else. She'd taken to Marta the way young people sometimes take to a quiet older one, leaning on that steadiness without quite knowing why. They didn't talk much over the noise. But they had a rhythm together, the two of them, and Junie trusted her. So when Prewitt came down the line again and stopped again behind Marta and did the same thing, the clicked tongue, the pencil, the tally crossed out. The lower number, the two words, slow hands, Junie saw the whole thing. And Junie was furious. She waited till he'd moved off down the belt, and then she leaned in close, red in the face. It wasn't right, she said. It wasn't near right. Marta caught more bad fruit than any two girls on the line, everybody knew it, and here he was docking her like she was half asleep. Junie wanted to march to the superintendent. She wanted to make noise. She was young enough to still believe that noise fixed things. Marta only reached into her apron and wiped the lens. "Let it go," she told the girl, quiet, and Junie couldn't understand it. Couldn't understand how a woman took that twice without a word. But I'll tell you what Junie didn't know, and what Marta did. There was pressure on Dell Prewitt that season, and the pressure came from above him, and it had a name. The name was Ambrose and Steele. Ambrose and Steele was a big wholesale house. A private label outfit. They bought catsup by the freight car and sold it under their own grand name in stores 3 states wide. And that year they'd signed a contract with Rennick Brothers for a private label run of catsup, the biggest order the little plant had ever landed. It was the whole season, it was the town's winter, and it lived or died on one thing: tonnage. Rennick Brothers had to pack out a mountain of catsup by a date on a calendar, and every pound counted. And the man responsible for making the weight on the floor was Harlan Voss, the plant superintendent, and the man Voss leaned on was Dell Prewitt. So Prewitt needed weight. He needed it badly. And a man who needs weight starts to look at that 90-degree cull bin, that bin of soft ones and trimmings and borderline fruit that was supposed to be hauled off. And he starts to think what a shame it is, all that good weight going to waste. And one day, to make his number, he gave the order. Marta saw it happen. She was at her place on the belt when a man wheeled the cull bin over, not out to the haul off, but around, to the mouth of the catsup kettle. And on Prewitt's nod, he tipped it in. The soft ones, the trimmings, the borderline fruit, the 90-degree fruit that no honest packer puts in a jar, straight into the kettle, to cook down with the good, to make the weight, to hit the tonnage, to feed the Ambrose and Steele contract and the bonus at the end of it. The other women didn't even look up. It was just weight to them. Just red going into red. Marta looked up. She watched that bin go in, and her face did not change, and her hands did not stop. But something in her went very still and very awake, the way it used to go when a strange sample came across her bench. And then, slow, she turned her head and looked at the calendar tacked up by the door. The season calendar, with the pack dates on it, and one other date besides. And she looked at it a long moment. And then she went back to sorting. Hold on to that. The bin. The kettle. The calendar. She was already counting. The third dock is the one you saw at the top. But now you know what was behind it, so let me set it down whole. It was a hard morning on the floor. Steam everywhere, thick and wet, the lye peel smell so sharp it caught in your throat. The belt running full and fast because the pack was behind and the contract date was coming, and every woman on the line pushing to keep up because Prewitt was in a black mood about the wait. He came down the line with his book, and he stopped behind Marta, and this time he did not just click his tongue. This time he made a thing of it. Because 31 women were on that floor, and a foreman in a black mood sometimes needs to be seen making an example. He tapped the backs of her hands, tap-tap, like you'd tap a slow horse. And he said it so the whole floor could hear over the machinery. Slow hands cost this plant money. Mrs. Keller read the tally, not me. And he docked her hardest of all. And the floor went quiet, or as quiet as that floor ever got. 31 women with their eyes down and their hands still moving, every one of them glad it wasn't her. Junie beside her looked like she might come out of her skin. But Marta wiped the lens, reached into her apron, took it out, cleaned the small brass glass with her thumb, and put it away. And she did not look at her hands, and she did not look at Prewitt. She looked at the cull bin. And she looked at the calendar by the door. And Dell Prewitt walked off down his floor thinking he'd measured a woman and found her wanting, when the truth is she had just finished measuring him. That night she climbed the hill slow, into the room over the hardware store. And she sat down with the widow's arithmetic, and the numbers were worse than tight now. The third dock had cut into the coal money, the real money, the money that stood between her and a cold room in December. It stung. I won't pretend it didn't. She sat there a long while in the lamplight and felt the full weight of it, a woman of 44 who'd once run a state test bench. Docked for slow hands by a man who couldn't read a slide if his life hung on it, and hungry for it besides. And that was the night the coal under the ash finally caught. Because she did not just sit with her grief. She got up, and she did the thing she had not done in 15 years. She had taken something home from the plant. Not stolen, not exactly. A spoonful. A single spoon of the catsup off the kettle run, the batch with the 90-degree culls cooked into it, carried home in a little covered tin in her apron. And now she set it on the table under the lamp, and she took out the brass hand lens, and she bent over it the way she used to bend over a slide at Verona. Here is what she was looking for, and I want you to understand it. Because it's the whole key to everything that comes after. There is a test. It is called the Howard mold count. A man named Howard worked it out, and the government fixed it as the standard back in 1911, more than 20 years before that night. It is not a matter of taste. It is not a matter of luck or a good nose. It is a hard number. You take a smear of the product, and you put it under a microscope, and the field of view is ruled off into standard sections, and you look across a set number of those fields, say 10 of them, and in each one you ask a plain yes or no question. Are there mold filaments here? Or not? Threads of mold, the roots of the rot, tangled through the smear. You count how many fields come up positive. If too many do, the lot is bad. It doesn't matter how it tastes. It doesn't matter how red it is. The number condemns it. And here is the thing that makes it a trap. The thing Dell Prewitt never dreamed of. The cooking doesn't save you. The heat of the kettle kills the mold, sure, kills it dead. But the filaments stay. The dead threads are still there in the smear, and they count exactly the same as live ones. You cannot cook a mold count away. You cannot hide it. The rot leaves its skeleton behind, and the skeleton is what you count. So the culls that Prewitt dumped in the kettle to make his weight, the soft ones, the 90-degree ones, the ones already turning, they carried their mold filaments right into the catsup, and no amount of boiling took those filaments back out. Marta knew this the way you know your own name, and that night, under the little brass lens on her kitchen table, she looked, and she began to count. The lens wasn't enough, and she knew it wouldn't be. So the next day she did something she'd not done in all her time in that town. She went to the druggist. Now, the druggist in Colvin's Landing was an older man, and years back when Marta first came. She'd bought a bit of lab glass off him for reasons she never explained, a few beakers, a graduated cylinder, an old habit, nothing more. He remembered her as a serious woman who knew her way around glassware. And he had a microscope in the back, a good one, that he used for this and that. She asked to borrow it. She didn't say why. He let her. And on her own table, at night, with a proper microscope now and a steady lamp, Marta Reinhold, because that's who was doing the counting, make no mistake, ruled off her fields the way she'd done 10,000 times. And she went across the smear of that kettle catsup one field at a time. Positive, negative, positive, positive. 6 fields of 10 came up foul. 6 of 10. Well over the line the Bureau had fixed back in 1911. Well over. That wasn't close. That wasn't a maybe. That was a lot condemned. That was catsup that would never, ever pass an honest inspection, sitting in cans with the Ambrose and Steele name going onto it, headed for stores 3 states wide. She sat back from the lamp. And she knew, with the cold certainty of a woman reading a number she'd read her whole life, exactly what she was holding. Now here is where most people would stop. Most people would say, well, it's not my plant. It's not my problem. I'll keep my head down and take my docks and mind my rent. And for 15 years that is exactly what the world had trained Marta Keller to do. Keep quiet. Expect nothing. The coal stays under the ash. She almost did. I won't pretend she didn't feel the pull of it. Silence was safe. Silence was the whole shape of her life. But she'd read the number. And you can't unread a number. So she did the next thing, and the next thing was the honest thing. The thing that separates this woman from a woman merely nursing a grudge. She did not go home and plot. She did not sharpen a knife in the dark. She wrote a warning. She sat down with a clean sheet of paper, and in her plain, steady hand she wrote a note to Superintendent Harlan Voss. She dated it. She kept it simple. No airs, no long words, nothing a man could dismiss as a hysterical woman. She wrote that the catsup being packed for the private label run would not pass a Howard mold count. That the trouble was the 90-degree culls going into the kettle. That the lot should be pulled and the culls kept out, before the inspection, before the cans shipped. Plain as that. A dated, sober warning from someone who plainly knew the words. And she did one more thing, the thing that told you who she really was under that apron. She made a carbon copy. She kept the carbon for herself, folded, put away safe. Because a woman who has run a test bench knows that a warning nobody can prove was given is the same as a warning never given at all. You keep the carbon. You always keep the carbon. Then she carried the note down and left it where Voss would see it. And Harlan Voss read it. I'll give him that much. He read it. He was a decent enough man, worn down by his contract and his tonnage and the bank behind him. And for one moment, that note put a cold finger on the back of his neck. Some part of him, some careful old part, knew that a note written that plainly by someone who used those words that surely was not nothing. But then he thought about Dell Prewitt's tonnage. He thought about the weight, coming in strong, right on pace to fill the Ambrose and Steele order and save the season and the town. And he thought, who wrote this? A sorting woman. A line woman. What does a line woman know about mold counts? And he did what tired men do with a fear they can't afford to look at. He filed it. He put Marta's note in a drawer, and he chose the tally over the analysis, and he went back to counting weight. That is the whole heart of this kind of story, and I want you to sit with it a second. It is not always a villain twirling a mustache that buries the truth. Sometimes it is a decent, frightened man with a bank behind him, choosing the number he wants over the number he was handed. By a person he never thought to look at twice. He had the answer in his hand, in his own drawer, and he filed it. Prewitt, of course, heard about it. Word travels on a floor like that. He heard the new woman, the slow hands woman, had gone over his head with some note to Voss, and it lit him up. Putting on airs, he called it. a sorter writing letters to the superintendent about how to run the pack. So he came down the line one more time, and he docked her again. For putting on airs, he as good as said it, and he walked off satisfied that he'd put a woman back in her place. He had no idea. None. He thought he was disciplining a slow pair of hands. He was standing over a woman who had already condemned his entire season in 6 fields of 10 and folded the proof into a drawer at home. And now we come to the turn. The moment this stops being a story about a woman who suffers and becomes a story about a woman who acts. Because Marta Keller did not quit. And she did not shout. And she did not weep. And she did not go to the newspaper or the sheriff or make a single sound the world could hush. She started to keep a record. Quiet, careful, sample by sample, night after night. Off the kettle runs. She'd carry home her little tin, and under the borrowed microscope she'd run her fields, and on a scrap of paper she'd write the date and the count. 6 of 10. 5 of 10. 7 of 10. Dated plain A field count a chemist could read at a glance and stake his name on. She was building a document. Not a rumor, not a complaint, a document. The kind of thing that, laid next to an official finding, would match it number for number and prove she'd known first. And she did one thing more, the coldest and the cleverest thing of all. She read the calendar. She knew how these things ran. She'd been on the other side of that bench for 15 years. She knew the government sent a man, a chemist, with a microscope, to inspect a plant packing under a big private label, and she knew, from the season's pattern, from the pack dates and the shipping dates and the plain rhythm of how these inspections came, almost to the week when that man would arrive at Rennick Brothers. She was not going to fight the plant. She had figured out something better. She was going to let the plant's own number walk in the front door under a government microscope, right on the week she'd marked, and she was going to have her dated record waiting, so that when the count came up foul, there'd be no mistaking who had called it first, and called it right, while the men with the pencils were still counting weight. She folded that night's scrap in with the others. She put out the lamp. Down at the plant, the belt kept running. Prewitt kept dumping his culls and making his weight. Voss kept his note in the drawer and his eyes on the tonnage. And on the calendar by the door, the date she'd marked came closer, one day at a time. And not one man in that building had the faintest idea it meant a thing. But Marta knew. To the week, she knew, when the man with the microscope was coming. And she had a spoonful of the truth, 6 fields foul out of 10, waiting for him under a borrowed lens. The days after that went quiet on the outside. Inside her, a machine ran. She did not quit. She did not raise her voice. She did the coldest thing a patient woman can do. She kept going to work. Every morning she took her place on the belt. Every morning Prewitt walked the line with his pencil. And every few days he crossed out her tally and wrote a smaller one, and she let him. She let him. That was the hardest part, and she did it on purpose. Because a woman who fights gets thrown out. A woman who counts gets kept. So she counted. Not the fruit alone, the days. She had a little tin in her apron now, the one she used to carry lab samples in years ago. Each night the kettle run came off warm and red, and each night she took home a spoonful in that covered tin. Nobody looked twice. Who watches a tired woman put a lid on a tin? At her kitchen table the borrowed microscope waited. The druggist's microscope, the one she'd talked him out of on a Sunday. Under the lamp she'd smear a thin film of the catsup on a slide, the way Howard taught the whole country to do it back in 1911, and she'd count. Here is the thing about a mold count. Most people think spoilage is a matter of taste. Smell it. Look at it. If it's off, you'll know. That is not how it works. That was the whole reason the Bureau built the test in the first place. The mold that grows on a rotten tomato leaves behind long, thin threads. Filaments, you can't see them with your eye. You cook the fruit, you boil it down to catsup, you scald it at the kettle, and the mold itself dies. But the filaments do not go away. They stay. They cook right into the sauce, and under a lens they lie there like broken hairs, and they count exactly the same whether the tomato went in fresh or went in 3 days soft. That was the trap Prewitt never understood. Heat hides the smell. Heat does nothing to the count. So the test is simple, and it is cruel, and it is fair. You spread the sample thin. You look through the microscope at one small field of view. Is there mold in it? Yes or no? Then you move the slide and look at the next field. Yes or no? You do this 10 times. 10 fields. And you write down how many came up yes. A clean pack, a careful pack, comes up positive in 1 or 2, maybe 3 on a bad day. The Bureau fixed the line years back. Get past it. And the lot is condemned. Nobody argues. There's no taste to fight over, no opinion. A number is a number, and any chemist with a microscope and a little patience gets the same number she got. 6. Night after night. 6. Sometimes 7. Once, from a bin that had sat in the 90-degree sun all afternoon, 5, and she'd almost been glad. And then she'd caught herself. Because 5 was still condemned, and gladness had no place at that table. She wrote each count on a scrap. The date, the kettle run, the field's foul out of 10. Plain, a chemist could read it in a second and stake his name on it. She folded the scraps and kept them together, and she kept the carbon of her warning note to Voss with them, safe, put away. She was building a document. Not a rumor, a document. And she read the calendar. She'd been on the other side of that bench for 15 years. She knew how the government moved. A plant packing under a big private label like Ambrose and Steele drew a federal man with a microscope, and from the pack dates and the shipping dates she'd figured him almost to the week. She marked one date on the season calendar by the door. Nobody noticed. Why would they? Junie noticed her, though, not the calendar. Her, one noon, sitting on crates with their lunch pails, Junie leaned close. "You're up to something, Mrs. Keller." Marta wiped her brass lens on her apron and said nothing. "I've watched you take his docs all month and not blink. That's not taking it. Nobody takes it that quiet unless they've got a reason." Junie's eyes were sharp. Her mother was homesick. She knew the exact weight of every docked cent. "What is it?" Marta looked at the girl a long moment. 19, quick-tempered, loyal as a dog and twice as brave. "If I tell you," Marta said, "you have to hold it like it's your mother's medicine. You spill it, and there's no getting it back." Junie nodded, slow. "The catsup they're packing is going to fail," Marta said. "A government man is coming to count it, and when he does, I'll be ready, and they won't. That's all. Now eat your lunch and yell at Prewitt about your own tally, same as always, so nothing looks changed." Junie's mouth opened, then shut. She ate her lunch. And the next morning she yelled at Prewitt about her own tally, same as always, and Marta could have kissed her for it. The trouble came on a Thursday. She was at the belt, and she'd stopped to note a count on a scrap in her apron, quick, the way she'd done 100 times. Prewitt came up behind her soft-footed and snatched it out of her hand before she'd folded it. "What's this?" She stood very still. "Nothing." He held it to the gray window light. Numbers. Just numbers. A date. A word he didn't know. A column of 10s. He turned it over. Turned it back. His face worked, and she watched him decide it was some private nonsense, a widow's ledger, egg money, sums. "You writing on my time now?" His voice rose so the floor could hear. "Slow hands, and now you're scribbling. I've half a mind to let you go, Mrs. Keller, right now. Before the season's out. I don't need a slow woman slowing my line the week the packing's heaviest." Her heart went cold and steady. Not the week. Any week but this one. She kept her face flat. "It's my egg tally, Mr. Prewitt. I'll keep it home." He crumpled the scrap and threw it down and ground it under his boot and walked off. And she stood there with her hands shaking just slightly. Because that scrap had a foul count on it, 7 of 10, and he'd held the whole thing in his fist and read none of it. That was the danger, right there. Nobody knew she could read the number. So nobody believed the number could read them. Voss kept her on. She learned that from Junie, who heard it from the office girl. The superintendent had been uneasy since her note, some splinter of doubt he couldn't dig out, and when Prewitt came to him wanting her let go, Voss had said leave her be, finish the pack. 1 more week. 1 more week. The exact week she'd marked on the calendar by the door. He came on a Tuesday. She knew him before she knew his name. A federal man. Gray suit. A wooden case he carried like it held glass. Because it did. Voss met him at the office and walked him out onto the floor, all handshakes and pride, showing off the tonnage, the belts, the kettle. 31 women bent to their work, and not one of them told to slow or hurry for the visitor's sake. The man set his case on a crate. He opened it. And there, folded out on a plank, was a microscope. Marta's hands did not stop moving on the belt. But everything in her went to that crate. He worked without hurry. He drew a sample straight from the catsup run, the very run Prewitt had built out of the 90-degree bin. He spread his film. He bent to the lens. And she watched a stillness come over him. The particular stillness of a man getting a number he doesn't like. He counted. She could see his lips move. 1 field. Move the slide. Next, she counted with him from 30 feet away, from memory, from every night at her own table. He straightened up. He looked at Voss, and his face had changed. This lot's foul, he said. Badly, I'm getting 6 positive fields. That's condemned, Mr. Voss. This can't ship under the Ambrose and Steel label. It can't ship at all. Voss went the color of the wall. Then the chemist did a thing that broke the whole floor open. He frowned, and he looked past Voss at the belt, at the bins, at something that didn't add up. Somebody already pulled the worst of it, he said, half to himself. The 90-degree bins flagged. Somebody culled this line and marked the bad stock aside before I ever got here. Who did that? Silence. Prewitt, near the kettle, said nothing. Because it hadn't been him. And Junie Farrow, 19 years old and unable to help herself, said it clear across the floor. She did. And pointed. Mrs. Keller. The chemist turned. He looked at the sorter in the stained apron, the woman with the brass hand lens in her hand, and something moved behind his eyes, some old drawer sliding open. He came closer. He was 39, and 15 years fell off his face while she watched, and he was a green boy again in a white coat who'd once ruined 3 slides in a morning and been shown, patiently, how not to. Miss Reinhold? He said. The old name. Her name from the bench. It's Keller now, she said quietly. I married. You ran the test bench at Verona. He said it like a man reading a thing he cannot believe he forgot. You taught me this count. This exact count. 1918, you stood over my shoulder and made me do 10 fields till I got them right. He looked at the microscope, at the catsup, at her apron. You're sorting. For 4 seasons, she said. He didn't understand yet. Not all of it. He only knew that the woman who'd taught the United States government's own man how to run a mold count was standing on a cannery line being paid by the bushel, and that she'd called this lot foul before he ever opened his case. How did you know? He said. How did you know the bin was bad? Before? Because I counted it, Marta said. Every night for a month. At my kitchen table, under a druggist's microscope. She reached into her apron, past the brass lens, and drew out the folded scraps and the carbon of the note. It's dated. All of it. 6 of 10, most nights. 7 twice. It's been foul since the 90-degree spell, and I told this plant so in writing, and they filed it. Ashworth took the papers. He read the top scrap. He read the next. His jaw set. And Prewitt, who had been standing frozen by his kettle while his whole world tilted, chose that moment to do the only thing a cornered small man knows. She did it, Prewitt said loud. Don't you see it? The slow woman. She's been at that bin, contaminating my line, sabotaging the pack. That's your mold, that's her. She's been mucking about with samples, sneaking catsup out, Voss. I told you to fire her, I told you, you told me to fire her, Voss said slowly, the week the inspector came. To protect the pack. The pack's condemned, Dell. Voss's voice was very tired. You can't contaminate a lot into failing a mold count. That's not how it works. Is it? He looked at Ashworth. No, the chemist said. It isn't. The mold grew in the field and the bin. Nobody can add filaments to a sample by counting them. She didn't foul this lot. She read it. He held up her scraps. And she read it right, weeks ago, to the field. For one long moment it hung there, and Marta felt the old cold hand of 15 years reach for her. The certainty that even now, even here, the men would find a way to make the number theirs and the blame hers. That the count was real, but the credit and the wage would go to Voss and the plant and some name that wasn't Reinhold or Keller. She had lived that once. She knew its face. But Ashworth turned to the superintendent and said, I want this done properly. On the floor. In front of your people. I'll count it again, aloud, and everyone will hear the number. I'll not have it whispered into an office and buried. Get me a crate and a clear space. And that was how it came to pass, in the packing room of the Rennick Brothers Canning Company, that a federal chemist set his microscope on an upturned crate in the middle of the floor, and 31 women set down their work. And Harlan Voss stood with his hat in his hands, and Dell Prewitt stood where his tonnage had died, and everybody watched. Ashworth drew a fresh sample from the run. He spread it thin. He bent to the lens. Field 1, he said. Positive, the room did not breathe. Field 2. Positive, he moved the slide. Field 3. Clean, moved it. Field 4. Positive, Field 5. Positive, his voice was flat and clear, the voice of a man reading a verdict off a card. Field 6. Clean. 7. Positive. 8. Clean. 9. Positive. 10. Clean. He straightened. 6 positive fields of 10. Over-tolerance. This lot is condemned. Then he lifted Marta's carbon note where the whole floor could see it, and he read it aloud too. The date, the count, 6 of 10, in her hand, from 3 weeks gone. And this, he said, is the same lot, called by the same count, by your sorter, before I ever walked in that door. They match. Field for field, they match. He set the paper down. And into that silence Marta Keller finally spoke the thing she had carried for 4 seasons, and she did not shout it. She said it quiet and dry. And it went to the back wall like a nail going into wood. You docked my hands, Mr. Prewitt. She wiped the brass lens on her apron, one last time, out of the old habit. You never once asked what my eyes were for. Nobody laughed. It was too true for laughing. Prewitt fell first, because he had the farthest to fall and the least under him. It came out fast now, one thing pulling the next. The 90-degree bin. The soft culls he'd ordered dumped into the kettle to make weight. Girl after girl on that floor had seen him do it and said nothing, because he held their tally. Now they had nothing to lose, and they said it. Voss heard it from 6 mouths in 5 minutes. And the terrible joke of it, the thing that hung Prewitt higher than any accusation, was his own defense. Nobody reads that stuff, he kept saying. Nobody reads the count. It's boiled, it's cooked, who's going to know? And every time he said it, he tightened the rope, because that was the whole of his crime in one sentence. He built his season on the bet that no one on his floor could read. He was wrong by 1 woman. His tonnage bonus, the thing he'd chased culls into the kettle to earn, was the very thing that damned him, because every extra ton was a ton of condemned catsup, and the bigger his number, the deeper the plant's disgrace. He gathered his coat in the end, and no one stopped him, and no one said goodbye. Voss fell slower and quieter, and it cost him more, because Voss was not a stupid man and knew exactly what he had done. Because it was his own file, his own drawer. When they pulled it, there was her warning, dated, plain, In her hand, the catsup will not pass the Howard mold count, pull the culls, and beside it, in the same drawer, the record of the tonnage he'd chosen to believe instead. He'd had the analysis in his hand. He'd held the answer for 3 weeks and picked the tally. He stood there turning her note over the way Prewitt had turned the scrap, except Voss could read it. And reading it was worse. The Ambrose and Steele contract voided on the spot, the condemned lot canceling the label, and the whole season's pack teetered behind it. A man's ledger, undone by a spoonful of truth he'd filed away. And then Harlan Voss did the one thing the small man never does. He came back and asked. It was the next morning. He found her by the door, under the calendar the marked date already passed. Mrs. Keller, he held his hat. There's pack still on the floor that isn't condemned. Good stock. If it's counted right, batch by batch, some of it ships and the season isn't a total loss. The men who ran the kettle can't tell me which batches are sound. You can. He swallowed. I'm asking, what would it take? She looked at him for a while, not with hate, with arithmetic. The test bench runs under my name, she said. Not a girl at a table. A bench, proper glass, and my name on the report. Every kettle run gets counted before it packs, and my count decides what goes in and what stays out. And the dock slips stop. Not just mine, all of them. You measure the fruit, not the hands. She paused. That's not revenge, Mr. Voss. That's just how a plant that wants to keep its contracts ought to run. I could have told you that 4 seasons ago. Nobody asked. Behind her, without a word, the line women had gathered. Junie first, then the rest, the whole floor that had kept the season alive with their hands. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. They just stood, 31 of them, where Voss could see them, and that was the whole vote. He put his hat back on. Start Monday, he said. The bench is yours. They say the Depression's great waste was idle hands, men on corners, empty factories, hands with nothing to do. Marta Keller would have told you that was never the real waste. The real waste was trained judgment, left standing on a sorting line for 4 seasons because nobody thought to ask the quiet woman what she knew. Autumn, 1937, a north window, and good clean light coming through it the way a chemist likes light, steady and cool. A scrubbed bench. A proper microscope now, brass and black, and coffee going cold beside it because she always forgot the coffee once the slides came out. The little hand lens sits on the sill. Retired, she doesn't need it anymore. But she keeps it there, in the sun, the way you keep a thing that carried you. She spreads a film. She bends to the lens. Field 1, clean. Field 2, clean. She writes the number in a bound book now, not on a scrap. And the number goes on the report, and the report decides the pack, and no 90-degree bin ever reaches a kettle at Rennick Brothers again, because the woman who counts the fields would see it in the sauce a week later and everyone knows it. Spoilage isn't luck here anymore. It isn't taste, or a foreman's guess, or a bet that nobody's reading. It's a number. 6 is condemned. 1 is clean, simple and cruel and fair. Across the river there's another cannery. It still runs the old way, on a floor boss's arithmetic and a wink at the culls. The next season it packs a lot on a hot week and ships it. And a man with a microscope condemns it, and it loses its label the same way Rennick Brothers nearly did. Nobody there was reading the count either. Some plants learn, some just lose. Rennick Brothers kept its contract. It runs on Marta's number now, and its number is clean, and the big house renews every year. Prewitt went to another county, they say, to another line. To boss another floor of hands he thought were the only thing worth measuring. Maybe he learned. Probably he didn't. Voss learned to read the fine print. Late, but he learned. He signs her reports without changing a figure, and once a season he stops by her window and says good morning, and means it, and that's more than she ever expected from the men with the pencils. Junie Farrow runs the sorting floor now. 19 when she pointed across that room and said she did. She counts fields 2 mornings a week and yells at nobody because there's no dock slip left to yell about. Marta drinks her cold coffee. She looks at the little brass lens in the sun. An old habit she'd have told you once. Nothing more. Turned out, it was everything. The quiet ones read the fine print. They always did. The only question was ever whether anyone would think to ask. Comment the town you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this one traveled. She sets the coffee down. Not because it's cold. She stopped caring about cold coffee sometime in the winter of '35, when cold was everything. When a room above a hardware store and a cup of anything counted as enough. She sets it down because she wants both hands free, and because the Tuesday count is waiting, and because she is a woman who finishes things. The bench is pine, scrubbed white with a brush she keeps beside the sink. Emil would have laughed at how clean it is. He was a man who thought neatness was a kind of vanity, which was easy to believe when the coal dust came in under every door and there was no point fighting it. He was not wrong for his world. She is building a different one, and it starts with a surface you can trust. She pulls the sample log toward her. 7 entries from Monday's kettle run, each one dated in her hand. Each one with a field count beside it. Clean down the column. 5, 3, 2, 4, 2, 3, 1, all well inside the Bureau's limit, all the numbers a contract requires. She initials the bottom and sets it in the outgoing stack for Voss. He will sign it before noon. He signs everything she gives him now, reads it first, and says nothing she has to correct. The plant is loud this morning. She can hear it through the north wall, the belt running, the steam hissing off the lye tank, the knock of the crate stacker 3 stations down. She used to hear those sounds as a kind of indifference, the machinery of a place that had no particular use for her. Now she hears it the way she used to hear the experiment station in the mornings before anyone else arrived. The sound of a thing doing what it was built for, correctly, because someone is paying attention. She picks up the lens. Not to use it. She does not need it for today's count. The microscope handles the fields now, proper and calibrated, and the lens is too small for the work. She picks it up the way you pick up a coin that has traveled a long way with you, not for spending. Just to feel the weight of it in the palm. It was her father's, originally, a watchmaker's aid, not a chemist's tool. She had adapted it for herself in the early years at Verona, when the good equipment was spoken for by the men with tenure and she was still the newest person in the room. She learned to count filaments through that small brass circle before she ever looked through a proper compound lens. She learned patience in it, to look slowly, to not decide before she had actually seen. That is the thing nobody ever taught her. She taught herself. You look. You count. You write the number. The number is not an opinion. Junie comes by the window at 8:30, on her way to the floor. She knocks the glass with one knuckle, a habit since November. A small check-in that neither of them has named or agreed to, it simply began and continued. Marta holds up the sample log. Junie sees the column and makes a small motion with her head that means good, and moves on. She has her own floor to run. She does not dock anyone's hands. She has been known to stand at the belt for 20 minutes teaching a new woman how to spot a soft spot on a tomato before it ever reaches the cull bin, because a cull caught early costs less than a cull caught late, and she does not believe in wasting anything or anyone. The sun comes through the north window at this hour, at a low angle, winter thin, and it catches the dust motes above the bench and the brass of the old lens and the steam from the coffee that Marta is now, quietly, drinking again. It is not a beautiful moment in any way that a photograph would catch. It is ordinary. The ordinary is what she wanted, not recognition. She had that, briefly, and it was loud and uncomfortable, and she was glad when it settled. Not revenge, she is not built for it, and it would have required her to keep thinking about Prewitt, which she finds uninteresting. What she wanted was the simple, clean thing, to be asked what she knew, and to answer, and for the answer to matter. She was asked, she answered. The number was the answer, the number held. She puts the lens down beside the microscope, where it lives now, retired but present, like a tool that earned its rest. She opens the next sample log and begins.